When I initially sat down to work on this assignment, I was trying to think of and research a good resource to critique that would promote diversity and multiculturalism in the classroom. As I continued to think about it, however, I thought it would be much more insightful to examine a resource that is used more consistently in everyday teaching. Eat well and be active has been a motto I have heard since I was a young child and throughout my life. During my most recent placement in grade 2 class, the teacher and I were sharing this very important concept with our students. During health and physical education one day, we were discussing different food groups and healthy eating, and the teacher used Canada's food guide as a reference point for this lesson. Shortly after, one of the students called me over and asked, "Mr. Busby, how come a lot of the food I eat isn't on this chart? Like, where does curry goat and roti fit?" Great question, I thought to myself. When preparing for this assignment, I thought back to this scenario, and it prompted me to want to examine Canada's food guide with a more critical eye. Canada's food guide is a nutrition guide produced by Health Canada. The food guide has been around since 1942 and has been updated several times, most recently in 2007. Health Canada suggests that the overall purpose of dietary guidance is to identify and promote a pattern of eating that meets nutrient needs and reduces the risk of nutrition-related chronic diseases such as obesity, diabetes, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. Eat Well with Canada's Food Guide is a resource that was developed for Canadians and is accessible for all Canadians. It includes guidelines for eating the right food groups specified by age group and gender. There are also tips for which foods to choose, the serving size of each food, and the best cooking methods. Also included are tips for maintaining a healthy lifestyle and body weight with physical activity. The food guide is available in many different languages. A food guide that is tailored to Canada's Aboriginal peoples is also available. This version of the guide is said to recognize the cultural, spiritual, and physical importance of traditional Aboriginal foods as well as the role of non-traditional foods in contemporary diets. The Eat Well with Canada's Food Guide is also available on request on diskette, large print, audio cassette, and braille. Since its inception in 1942, there have been many revisions to the Canada Food Guide in an attempt to meet the changing, diverse, and multicultural needs of the population. When looking at the Canada Food Guide, if you're Canadian, you'll likely observe ingredients that are familiar and accessible, and notice some sort of repetition with what has been taught your whole life. But what is being left out? As someone who grew up in a Trinidadian household, as I now reflect, I remember noticing that much of the food that was prepared and eaten in my household was not represented on the food guide that I learned about in school. Canada's Food Guide has been referenced throughout all grades when teaching about and discussing healthy eating, nutrition, and being active. When teaching about these topics, just like in all areas of education, it is essential for educators to know their students and use this knowledge to inform their teaching practices. Students have different experiences with food, and there are many factors such as allergies, culture, religion, etc. that may influence that experience. For example, studies have shown that between 80 to 90% of food allergies in children involve cow's milk, eggs, peanuts, wheat, soy, tree nuts, or fish. Since many of these foods are considered good choices for healthy eating, it is easy to see how learners with allergies may be concerned about getting the nutrients they require. As such, educators should reassure learners that they can still have healthy diets even when allergies prevent them from eating certain foods. One way to do this is to emphasize that vitamins and nutrients found in these foods are also present in many others. Culture also plays a significant role in our relationships with food. In every culture, food is eaten for many reasons other than hunger. It can provide comfort and security. It can be a symbol of hospitality or social status, or it can hold religious significance. Culture, religion, and tradition influences what and how we eat, as well as how we prepare and serve our food. Just as some learners avoid food due to allergies, others may not eat foods from all food groups because of family, cultural, or religious reason. The Ontario Ministry of Education's Health and Physical Education Curriculum Guidelines clearly outlines that students should learn to examine their food choices and make the healthiest decisions while working within the parameters they can control. This has significant implications for educators, educators must be aware that learners have variable amounts of control over the food they eat at home and bring to school. Both the kinds of food and the amounts available at home will dictate how a child eats. In particular, young children and those who live in poverty may have very little control over their diets, and they may not be able to eat healthy foods every day. Children who live in poverty often eat less healthy foods than their more affluent counterparts. Fresh fruits and vegetables, for example, are expensive and may be out of reach for many families. For these reasons, educators must be respectful and use sensitivity when teaching about healthy eating. The multicultural makeup of Canada is rich and diverse. As such, revisions to the Canada Food Guide will need to embrace the variety and depth of foods available to Canadians. This is not to suggest that Canada's food guide should be disregarded, but rather to acknowledge and appreciate that Canada's food guide is just that, a guide. Teachers need to take this guide and adapt it to the needs of their students in a way that is actually helpful and accounts for what is missing. It is important that they do not make learners feel that one value system or food practice is superior to another, and that no food groups, or eating practices are criticized. Educators must avoid making assumptions about students based on their country of origin, culture, or religion. On the contrary, educators need to create an inclusive environment by recognizing and celebrating both the wonderful variety of foods consumed by their learners and the multitude of ways those foods are enjoyed. The Canada Food Guide is currently under revision again for the first time in over a decade. This new guide will be rolled out in 2018. By making sure Canada's food guide is relevant to people of all cultures, we not only ensure its inclusiveness, but we also provide people with a vast array of food selections that broaden and enhance healthy food choices. As such, the voice and input of the people from the multicultural country should be sought and incorporated into the development of such a guide. Socioeconomical factors and subsequent suggestions should also be considered to make Canada's food guide a more equitable resource. I am not suggesting that using the Canada Food Guide is bad, but rather asserting that how it is used makes all the difference from an equity and diversity perspective. I have been taught about and encountered the Canada Food Guide many times throughout my life. Looking at it now with a more critical eye, I can appreciate that in order to successfully use this guide as a resource in my classroom, my student's voice must be the filter through which it is taught. Learning about and incorporating these interests, lifestyles, preferences, cultures, religions, traditions, etc. will form the foundation for how I approach and teach this very important yet diverse topic in an equitable and inclusive manner.